Hi there, I'm going to share my sermon for the day. It is the third Sunday of Easter, but it's also May the 4th, Star Wars Day, and it is also the day after federal election in this country. The readings for today's service are from the book of Acts, chapter 9, verse 1 to 20, and then the book of Revelation, 5, 11 to 14, and the gospel reading is from John 21, verse 1 to 19. Feel free to pause the video, have a read of those, and then start it up again. In 2015, when the new Star Wars trilogy, the sequel trilogy, started coming out, there were some complaints from some viewers, believe it or not. Over the course of the trilogy, one of the complaints about the sequels was that they were just repeating what the original trilogy did. The Empire was back in a new form, still with stormtroopers who can't really shoot anything, except they can now. And then there was Death Stars again. Even the Emperor was back. When we're reading John's Gospel, especially if we've read it after Mark and Matthew and Luke, it might feel a little bit like, do we really need another one of these? John is written quite a bit later than the others, but it tells some of the same stories, but sometimes in a different order and with a lot more of Jesus making speeches. Another thing that some viewers were upset about the sequel trilogy was that an elderly Luke Skywalker was no longer the kind of Jedi hero that he was as a young man. They didn't want to see a Luke Skywalker who had gotten old and who had failed as a leader and retreated to an island on a distant planet, withdrawn from society in shame. They wanted to think that Luke was always going to be successful, always a hero. But these sequel films were showing him at a stage of life when he's ashamed and broken and without hope. The ancient church might have been tempted to avoid this in their portrayal of the first disciples of Jesus. They might have been tempted to just show them only as young, admirable heroes, especially folks like Paul, who has shaped so much of Christian theology through his letters, and somebody like Peter, who was a leader in the church and who the Catholic Church recognizes as the first pope. If we're expecting the story of a hero, we might find the tone of today's gospel to be a bit strange, because this happens after the disciples have received the good news of the resurrection, but they don't seem like they've been enlivened by that. Last week we heard about Jesus appearing in the room with them, commissioning them to go and offer forgiveness to the world, and Jesus has breathed his spirit on them. But it seems like Peter has not been moved by any of this. He says, screw this, I'm going fishing. And the disciples catch nothing. We might have heard a story like this a few months ago, if we've been following the lectionary, at the beginning of Luke's gospel, where Jesus calls the fishers to come and follow him. And here the story happens in the end. John's put it at the end instead, but it's a pretty similar story. We might get complaints that we've already heard this story in another gospel. Do we need it again? But something different is happening here. We're hearing the same kind of story that we hear in a gospel, but it's being told differently, and so it means something different. A stranger on the beach tells the disciples to try fishing from the other side of the boat. And as though that is going to make any difference. And they catch 153 fish. Not 150 fish, 153. In that part of the world at that time, there was an understanding that there were 153 kinds of fish. It's like they've caught one of every species of fish all out of the same lake. It's bizarre. It's a bit spooky. It's as though some strange and powerful force is at work. They realize that it's their master on the beach and they go to the beach to eat with him. But as they're eating fish and bread again, like they did when they shared food with the hungry crowds, because this is just the kind of thing that happens in a gospel. This is a gospel story kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that always happens again and again and again. But it seems like Peter is unmoved. It's like there's a stoniness in his heart. I wonder if he's shutting himself off from Jesus because he knows that he failed and deserted Jesus and said that he never knew him. He knows he betrayed his master and he's ashamed. So when when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And when he says it in Greek, it's more like he's saying, Peter, do you adore me? Peter says, yes, I love you. But in Greek, it's more like he's saying, yeah, Jesus, of course I love you, mate. I love you like a brother. He's saying he does love Jesus, but there's something blocking him from being able to respond in kind. He's just not able to return Jesus' affection in the same way as they're sharing that fish and bread because of what he's done. It's awkward and uncomfortable. I can imagine the other disciples not knowing where to look as Jesus asks Peter again, Peter, do you adore me? And Peter says, yeah, I love you like my own brother, mate. Peter can't come that close. He can't express the same affection. Some of us may have had connections like this where there's been a closeness, but some kind of disappointment or betrayal or failure has complicated it. It's made the relationship cold. I think Jesus recognizes this is as close as Peter can come at the moment, and he adopts Peter's posture. He says, Peter, do you love me like a brother, like a true friend? And Peter is moved by this. It demonstrates Jesus' love for Peter, that is willing to move to where Peter is, to where Peter's comfortable, so that he can be with him. Jesus has provided for them and shared with them on the beach. And he sends them to pass on that care, to care for the sheep, feed the lambs. Remember that there's more than enough for everyone if we share what we have. On the other hand, in our reading from the book of Acts, we hear the story of Saul. And so, this is Saul who has watched the execution of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. And he's looked on at that with approval, and he's gotten permission to go out into the regional areas and round up more Christians for the same treatment. He's the last person we would expect to become a leader in the church. There's a million red flags. Makes me think of someone that I was talking to just recently who was telling me about all of the people he hates. He was listing the categories of people that he hates, and he was asking me, is there a political party that he could vote for that shared his views? And the obvious response to a hateful person is to reject them as they reject the rest of us. But the response of Jesus is to reach out to Saul, to reach out to the hateful and violent person, even as Saul is spreading hate and violence. And he reaches out not just to accept him, but he reaches out with a challenge to Saul's hate. Without his sight, Saul is vulnerable and dependent on the care of Ananias. And Ananias could have been driven by fear. He could have been driven by hate with good reason, because this was a man who was seeking to detain and kill Christians. But Ananias reaches out to his enemy and cares for him while challenging the perception that Saul has had of people who follow the way of Christ. We've been going through a time of ugly division in our society and in the world. If we watch the news, it can be easy to see the threat of evil empires, which never seem to go away. They're always coming back. We always have to be ready to resist hate and cruelty and fear. And the way that Christians fight that is by reaching out with a challenge. We offer care and a challenge. Because when we take on those same qualities of hate and fear and cruelty in our struggles, and when we aim those at our opponents, that is when we become the next evil empire. We need to remember that we're not trying to establish a regime. We're worshipping the one who sits in power behind the scenes. Jesus is the one who we're ultimately loyal to in the church, and we're looking to follow his way of resistance without turning to violence. Our hope is that we will be able to win our enemies over so that we can be reconciled and restored, and so that we can break bread together.